Welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue with our example where we created a server and we used some of those core modules to implement this functionality of routing. And so let's jump back to our code. So here's what we have. We have the require statement that's going to bring in the HTTP module where we can use some of that functionality, such as some of the different properties, some of the different functions. And so you'll see that here we're using a create server function where we can actually use the request and response object. And those requests, we can listen to requests that are made over the network, and then we can respond a certain way. And these request and response objects, they have a number of different properties that we can utilize, such as the URL, and then the request .method, which is another property. But what we're going to do is we're going to flush out this example a little bit more. We're going to add some, you'll see that I've added some HTML pages. I added an about page, a contact.html page, and we're going to bring in another core module called the file system. So here we'll say const fs is the variable, and we'll say require fs for a file system. So that's a core module that we'll be using. And so at this point, instead of actually responding with some text that we're going to write back, we're going to respond back with HTML. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this file system to read in the content of our about and our contact page. So in our about page, we just have a simple HTML document, and we just have one div that says about page. And what I'm going to do is change this to H1. We'll close it off with H1. And so our file system is going to read each character within this page, and we're going to assign the information that it read back to the write method, which is here. So we'll still use this write method, but we're going to pass it a variable that contains everything that was been read in from this file. So what we're going to need to do that, we're going to need the file system. So we're going to go here. We're going to use the fs dot, and I'm going to use a method called read file. And this read file is going to take two different arguments. One is going to be the file, the path, and so you can get some hints here with IntelliSense from Visual Studio. It's going to take the file path. In this case here, it's in the root directory, so we're going to give it, we'll say about. And then here, we're going to have a callback function as the second argument. And then we'll just do anonymous function. And then within this anonymous function, we're going to define two different arguments. One is going to be the error message, a variable that's going to hold the value for the error message. And then the actual variable where the information that it reads in is going to be stored. And it's going to be stored into this particular variable called data. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this response.write or res.write and res.in. And I'll paste that in here. So at this point, what's going to happen is that it's going to read this file, this about.html file. That's going to store all the contents into this data value variable. And what we're going to do is we're going to then respond back to the client with data. And so data is going to hold all of the content that it read. And like I said, it's going to read each character at a time, and it's going to store it into the data variable. And then we're going to say res.in. So I'm going to pause the video and do that for the rest of my routes here. And then I want to talk about a few more things related to what we need to do to make sure that the HTML actually displays in our browser. So let me save this, and then let me finish out the code here. All right, so I've added the read file function to each of my different routes. And so if I were to save this, Control S, and then go ahead and run my code, the way we do that would be node, and then we just call the name of the file, server.js. You'll see that there's one more thing I need to do. So right now, my server is started, and it's listening on port 8080. I didn't say too much about ports, but ports is like a channel. And so our application is on channel. You can kind of think of it as like a channel 8080. And so what we have to do is go to our browser here, and we'll just say localhost 8080. So we automatically come to our home page. And then here, if we want to check our other pages here, so we can say contact. We got our contact page. You'll see that the HTML is pulling through. But then if we go back to the home page, the HTML doesn't pull through. Sometimes the browser will just make amends and allow for your content to display as HTML. But we want to make sure that it always pulls through with HTML. So we're going to adjust our file slightly. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually set one of the headers for how we're going to respond back and set one of the headers. And one of the headers we're going to set is the content type. And so there's a method called write head. And so here what we're going to do is we're going to say res. So respond back. We're going to write one of the header, write the header file, or write one of the properties for the header file. And so we write head. And if this is a successful request, which is the first property status code of 200. 200 stands as that it was a successful request. And then the second argument is going to be which header do we want to set. In this case here, we want to set the content type. And what I'm doing is responding back with JSON code. And I'm going to do that for each one here. Okay, so then each of my routes have the write head that we set in the content type to text.html so that the browser recognizes that this is HTML text or render it as HTML. So we're going to kill our server, Control C to stop our server. And we just press the up arrow to get that command right back. We're going to press enter and that should start up our server again. So now we're going to refresh. All right, so now if we go and refresh our page, we already refreshed our page here. Now if we just go to our home page and press enter, we should have a home page, which is actually pulling the HTML. And if we go to our contact page, our contact route, it's going to put up the contact page, and the same will happen for the about page. Now I want to go back and I'm just going to right click and inspect this page. I'm going to show you the actual header property that we just set. So I'm going to refresh here so we can actually see. So if we click on contact, which is the document that we're requesting, which is the contact.html page, we'll click on that and let's double click on it here. Whoops. Let's inspect one more time. Network, let's refresh. And every time I refresh, it basically goes to the server, requests all of the documents for that page, all the resources for that page. So I click on contact and you'll see headers, and then here's the different type of headers that we can set. So in this case here, we set the text/html. So if we go back to our code here, that's what we did for server.js, is that we have this write head, and then we had two arguments. It's the status code, and then the second argument is what header do we want to set. And so we set it to text/html. So that's where we can set multiple headers, right? So we don't necessarily just have to set the content type, but if we wanted to, we can go ahead and set another particular header if we wanted to. So we could say set the header, let's say set the cache control, and we could change the value for that. So there's a lot of things that we can do with the request and response object. Some of it just takes us playing around with it, doing some research online to get familiar with it. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about NPM, Node Package Manager, and how we can use external modules or third-party modules to enhance our application and bring in functionality that other folks have already built. Stay tuned.